Hello there, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Comix Rant Mini. I'm your host, Arvin Bautista, and I have been doing a series of episodes lately. I like to call my comic book Christmas Advent Calendar Collection. And I love this time of year. I love Christmas. And whenever it's Christmas, I bust out all my old comic book Christmas themed comic books, holiday themed, New Year themed, and what have you. This will be my last one of this series as it is Christmas Eve today. And I just wanted to wish you guys a Merry Christmas. Thanks for tuning in. And this episode, we're going to talk about George Pratt's Enemy Ace War Idyll. And I actually had to I've loved this book. I've had it for quite a while. I bought it at this bookstore, used bookstore in San Francisco called Green Apple Books. And it's a war book. It's a war book. You know what? I should have looked up. So I got it for $9. It's usually $15 cover price. I don't know. I don't think they print this anymore. They should. It's a fantastic book. It is a war story. I guess you could say it's like a modern war story. Let's see, 1981. Oh wait, 1984. Here we go. First American edition, published in 1984. So I was still in the Philippines. I was not in the U.S. yet. I am in California currently, but I was not. I probably did not have access to this book. I could not possibly have any access. Anyway, it's a book about one of the DC characters called Enemy Ace, which is this German crack shot fighter pilot that served during World War I. And the way George Pratt approaches this is... Oh, by the way, Enemy Ace, I think, was drawn by like Joe Kubert and written by Robert Kanigher, I believe. I could be wrong. But it's a classic book that I've never actually read. Personally. And George Pratt is a painter. If you have kind of figured that already, check out this cover. It's already kind of crazy. So it's quite a sobering story. It's a war story, and we follow this younger guy called Manic, I believe. Look at this splash. So animes look like that. Joe Kubert drew it like a crazy man, and it looks awesome. I need to read more of it. But we catch up to Enemy Ace like in his really late years. He's hospitalized and he's suffering from something. I'm not sure if they actually tell you specifically what it is, but look at these beautiful pages. It's watercolor. And George Pratt has a great application of it. Really awesome. So the guy's name is Von Hammer. Awesome name. He rides like this red a fighter plane in World War II. And this guy, Manic, comes in. He's a reporter, and he says he's doing a story about World War I, World War I vets and all that kind of stuff. It turns out, even from the beginning, that the character of Enemy Ace actually spots him as a veteran, because you could kind of see this, apparently it's like this condition where you have 1,000-yard stare. I think it's what it's called for a lot of veterans, because it's kind of sad. It's like this, I guess it's almost like they've kind of detached a bit from, because they were like in this wartime conditions, which are heavy. And then, Manic here. So Enemy Ace, Von Hammer, sees it in this reporter. And then we are shown that he also has this moments of PTSD. And he served in Vietnam. Von Hammer served in World War I. He served in Vietnam. So there's like this common bond. And we see a lot of it happen throughout the course of this story. I'm going to flip through here. It's interesting as certain parts of it, he will switch to this prose where it's dialogue between two characters and he just uses one image. It's also kind of cool because Manic is a writer, journalist, right? So it fits. It makes sense. It's like the article that he's writing. And then George Pratt can kind of showcase a lot of this, his painting skill, basically. And it has a lot of his flashbacks about World War I and how he is a loner. Enemy Ace is a loner, and he can kind of, there's a symbolic moment where he kind of shares a meal with this wolf and doesn't know if he's real wolf or not. So a lot of this book is about like the traumas of war. And, you know, it's fascinating. I've never been in a war, thank goodness. You know, definitely when I encounter veterans, you know, I mean it when I say thank you for your service, because I don't think I'd survive in a war, guys. I don't think I could do it. You know, the veterans themselves barely can because of all the things they kind of went through. Or even people that served, even if people that served that were not in a war, they got their own stories going on there too. Anyway, so the style of the book is really great. So there's watercolor moments, and then there's these, I guess he's reading, this younger guy, Manic, is reading about World War I incidents, and he's kind of like blurring them with his experiences in Vietnam. Yeah, so this is a deep Christmas book right here. Well, there'll be Christmas, I'll show you. And he's like a tunnel rat. He goes underground, basically, to ferret out the forces, the Vietnamese forces. It's pretty crazy. I cannot even begin to imagine the things that soldiers had to go through in any war, to be honest with you. But it is really well written. George Pratt writes this really well. There's a lot of like poetic language that is being used. A lot of great words that he chooses. And it's quite fascinating and quite inspiring to see, because I'm always just like, I'm the artist. I don't write, and I'll just do wordless stuff, wordless comics. And I like wordless comics, but it does take a skill, a great skill for a writer to pair up with an artist and make use of both mediums and put them together in comics. And in this case, it definitely shows that George Pratt is a great writer and a great artist. Some of these action sequences are great, but I wanted to call out something. So that the title is War Idyll, and I had to look it up, the definition of idol. I know generally what it means, but specifically this word idol refers to a form of poetry, a poetry kind of a descriptive poetry, a narrative descriptive poem. And idyllic, the word that comes from idol, kind of means something that's beautiful in its simplicity. So it's an interesting word to put on top of war, right? War idol. But one of the best things to think about is it's war poetry. And these two words themselves are kind of fighting each other, you know, if you think about it. But it does describe this book eloquently, like perfectly. And, you know, so there's action sequences, of course. It's Enemy Ace, so there's got to be some crazy, awesome action sequences. And they're rendered really crazy. I remember first looking at this stuff many years ago, and I was like, whoa, this is nuts. Watercolor and all sorts. It looks like there's some kind of like dry application here of some kind of paint. Maybe an acrylic. I'm not sure. But it's fantastic in the way it presents these air battles. Some of it is just like almost like hard to see. And it works so well, like the confusion of war, all these bullets flying around, like these streaks of death basically flying all around. And it's like in this great, like painterly application. It's just fantastic stuff. People are, you know, getting shot. This stuff is not for kids. You know, I think my kid saw me reading it. She didn't see this stuff inside. She just knew it was this book and was curious what I was reading. And I described it to her. It's like this beautiful book. It's a war book about the tragedy of war and so on. And she was like, do you think I could read it? I was like, no, not yet. Maybe when you're much older. But, you know, I definitely will take her up on it like a few years down the road, like 15 years from now or something like that, when she might be curious about figuring out what her dad was reading. But it is such fantastic stuff. All this battle stuff that's going on, the layering, the craftsmanship of this paintwork that he does. You know what else is cool? is I was like, it's so painterly that a lot of painterly books for me, comic books, will have a hard time working sound effects in there and even lettering, like just people talking, right? Like that Alex Ross book I started this series with. It's difficult to try to figure out how to letter something like that. And the letterer here, who is the letterer? Willie Schubert does a great job. Does a fantastic job. I'm not sure if George Pratt is the one that painted some of the sound effects, but even the choice of like graying out some of these bubbles so they're not so stark. And it's not always like that. There are some bubbles that are, white. So maybe that's him, but it's laid out well. Maybe George Pratt also has a hand in saying what's going on there, and even this kind of thing where it's like typewritten. And I'm not sure if this is George Pratt, but a lot of these sound effects, like click, and then this war stuff that's going on, tuck, 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 right? Like all these sound effects that you would think in your head, should not work in a comic book, works really well. My dog agrees. And it works really well, and it looks fantastic. Look at this stuff. This one too. It crashes. So what ends up happening, he gets into a big battle. This is one of his recollections, Enemy Ace's recollections. Von Hammer's recollection is he crashes. There's a big fight. Someone actually gets the upper hand on him as he's trying to save his squad, and he crashes in the middle of this crazy battlefield. He stops right there, but it gets continued on the next chapters. These chapter breaks are also fantastic. It's just I think it's these sketches. He mentions later on that they're like these sketches that he did in preparation that don't necessarily fit within the narrative, but he said it, and he's right. He describes them as it fits within the story, this whole thing, and maybe how he prepared with this one. All these special effects going on and typography. And I'm not sure if that could be the letter. It definitely looks like it's applied after. So hats off to Willie Schubert. Is that right? Did I get his name right? Hats off to Willie Schubert for actually pulling off a lot of these things, trying to letter something as painterly as this. Here's a nice moment. So they have a moment together, and basically it comes out that Manic is not actually a journalist, but is a vet and just really wants to dig down and try to understand like this trauma that he's experiencing with another vet. And, he picks Von Hammer. And Von Hammer finally gets to convince Manic to actually tell his story. And this is a great moment because this is comic book love language right here, man. And I love it. Like it could be just one image, right? But because he broke this up, there's a moment that happens between these two panels that I think is even greater than if it is just one image. It's an action now, right? Like you can really feel that he's like ringing this thing because it's separated into this moment by itself. And I love that. I love this panel right here. And then he also puts like this brown, which is a great storytelling device because he switches to this brown on the flashback, and now they're underground. So that's why it's brown. And, he talks about this whole thing in Vietnam, and, it's survivor's guilt. I guess the quickest way I can describe it. It gets gruesome. And a lot of George Pratt's stuff, it reminds me of, I think, some of his contemporaries, which is John J. Muth. This kind of palette, this pale, I don't know how they do it, but it's like this white and pale, like lighting with, using watercolors that has this ghostly look. And, the color choices that they do, this kind of yellow, right? It definitely is not the watercolor that you would think of, right? With pleasant, like idyllic, hues, right? It's not like that. It's definitely got a lot more weight to me. Anyway, so he describes his experience in Vietnam, and they're basically, Von Hammer doesn't know what this kid wants from him. All he can do is share his stories. And so now it's Von Hammer's turn, and this is where we kind of get into, I think, what I would like to think classifies it as a Christmas story for me. Anyway, so it turns out that when Von Hammer crash landed his plane, it was in no man's land. This is World War I, no man's land. And, there's like gas that's being released here. This is like a crazy sequence again. It's just like this very kinetic and hectic and violent scene, screaming and everything, where one of the guys that he's fighting, an enemy soldier, he rips his mask off and the guy gets exposed to this gas that was being used in World War I, got outlawed because it was just, well, for lack of a better description, it was very mean, right? Like, it was not cool. A lot of the world was like, let's not do that again. So there's laws against that kind of stuff. Enemy Ace decides to kill the guy and put him out of his misery, and he holds them. All right. Okay. So all this stuff is going on. This is still going on in war, and it's like, Arvin, where's the Christmas part of this story? It ends up that, okay, so he makes his way out of the trenches. He kind of hides. He finds other soldiers. It ends up that the time that he actually landed in that trench was during Christmas. Now, when I read this, I have no real idea about history. I'm pretty terrible at it. And so I'm reading this, and then he describes this scene where both sides, the British and the Germans, come out of the trenches where everybody's just kind of hunkered down trying to kill each other, come out of the trenches and start singing Christmas carols and celebrating, partying, and exchanging stories, playing football with each other. That's European football, by the way. And it's like this crazy scene. I remember I was like, what? Is this just in a comic book? Is this for real? But it actually really happened. It really happened. And, his Von Hammer's shock mirrors my own, because I was like, what the? You got British forces hanging out with German troops, sharing cigarettes and stories and singing and drinking and celebrating Christmas. And it's wild. It is so wild to me. The sad part is it was not a official truce, and it was just like with the soldiers. Apparently the British soldiers heard the German soldiers singing carols around Christmas, and apparently there were trees, like fir trees in the trenches that they could see. So I don't know who had the guts to actually get out of the trench and start sharing Christmas with the other German soldiers, but they did. And I guess not the whole line in between, right? Not the whole front line celebrated Christmas. Other ones were still fighting, but there were chunks that were fighting stop, and they would celebrate with each other, share a drink, because goodwill to men and all that, because it's Christmas. And, he shares this, and I've since then read up on it, and it's just it still is a fascinating time in history that is almost unbelievable to me. But definitely, talk about warm and fuzzies. These troops completely stopped during Christmas, and they respected each other. And, what's sad is after that, apparently after Boxing Day, which is I think a day or two after Christmas, people stopped congregating, and then fighting started again, and their superiors got really mad this happened, and they kind of outlawed it, and anybody who tried doing that would get, I don't know, court-martialed or whatever. They'd be punished, basically. Anyway, so Von Hammer shares that story and kind of gets Manic a tip on how to survive, basically. This whole book has been about him surviving. And he said to hold on to just one thing, find that one thing to survive, to keep going, because surviving is a present in itself, and to honor the troops that have fallen. It's an amazing story, guys. I'm running over time here, but worth it for me to share this story. And I'm going to spoil this book for you guys, but it ends on a sad, but also kind of like a happy note, because Von Hammer has his own nightmares that he's dealing with throughout the course of this book, and he passes away at the end. But he does give Manic, who is a writer, by the way, that's what he holds on to as his way of coping with his trauma. Von Hammer gives him his diary. I think it's his war diary. And I'm not sure if this is in the comics or not, but it's his war diary during the course of time that he served as enemy ace, basically. Right? And look at this palette. It's just it's so different, right? It's free. And that's it. For Von Hammer, the way that he escaped, when he's reminiscing about those days, because he's a crack shot ace fighter pilot, right? And it was easier for him to deal with war in that way because he wasn't in the trenches until he experienced it like this when he was there. When he was, there's an enemy soldier that was blinded by the gas that he helped out. And, this whole thing in Christmas time, he came so close, like right face to face with like real war, basically, that, his way of escaping it was actually to flight. That was something that he shared with Manic. And that's the end of that book. He kind of, it's depicted lovely here, like very, very well done, as it's a camera pan up as Von Hammer passes away. This is like in his old age, right? Like way many years after the Joe Kubert comic book. It was interesting. A fantastic book. I cannot recommend it more. Eye-opening for me, and just definitely like, it's just so heavy and touching. Just humanity, and also like how separated and how connected we all are. It's a little, yeah. Anyway, so he has these sketches in the back of the book that are fantastic, that kind of help him get ready to draw this book. There's some crazy, like looking paintings in here. They're just so expressive. And I'm not sure what he does nowadays. I think he's done a few other things, but he is a painter by trade. At the time of this book, so he. That's how he made his money. But yeah, Enemy Ace War Idyll is a great book. It is the one that it's definitely one of the books that I come back to year after year, read and reread. It is quite jarring, read and reread, but it's also very hopeful. So this is my last pick for my series of the comic book Christmas Advent Calendar Countdown. I hope you enjoyed it. I will try to come back for more for some New Year's books, but this is the last one for the Advent Countdown. And thank you guys for joining me. Have a great Christmas Eve, great Christmas Day. I want to wish you guys a Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, and Happy Holidays from Comix Rant. I'm your host, Arvin Bautista, and I hope you guys have a great holiday and a great New Year. See you guys next time.